Hi, I'm Kylene.
And I'm Jonathan, and we are the Provident Preppers.
Do you know how to keep potatoes and other root crop vegetables, and perhaps even apples, good throughout the entire winter?
In this video, we are going to talk about a do-it-yourself root cellar that you can build out of an old freezer. It's really fairly straightforward, fairly easy, and fairly inexpensive.
And it keeps the fruits and vegetables good throughout the entire winter.
So today we are going to take you through a little adventure that we had building a really easy do-it-yourself root cellar from an old freezer that we were able to acquire. If you look around, you can find an old chest freezer from somewhere that has died and build one of these yourself. If you Google the Provident Prepper chilling in our do-it-yourself buried freezer root cellar, you'll be able to see some of the step-by-step instructions that we developed while we were building this. But this has really worked well for us, so we're excited to share it with you. And make sure you check out the show notes from this video for some good links. Now let's start with the basic principles of root cellar design, because no matter how you build your root cellar, these are important principles that are going to extend the life of the produce or food items that you put in there. The first is that it needs to be cool. Ideal root cellar is as cool as you can get it, about 40 degrees or lower without freezing. The next is we need to actually control the humidity. It needs to be a humid environment because that's best for the produce, but it can't be too wet or waterlogged, and dryness isn't good for it either. That is one of the reasons why a lot of times in a root cellar there's a bare floor or gravel, and you'll notice in here we put sand in to help to control the humidity. It needs to be dark because light promotes growth and deterioration of the produce. Also, ventilation. Your root cellar's got to be accessible. If it's not going to be of much use to you, because I can tell you in the dead of winter, when I have to go out and freeze to get something, it's just not happening. Now, site selection. When we thought about burying this freezer, the last thing we wanted to do is dig a hole. So as we were surveying our home, the places that we could possibly place this buried freezer, we settled on the north side of our home because it's a shady location. Always, if you can put your root cellar in a shady location on the north side, that's going to be one of the best places to keep it cool. It's got to have good drainage and it's got to be accessible. This is near our home, so it's very accessible. If you look, we have not finished backfilling this, so you can see the window well right there. And if you look very carefully, you can see the foundational blocks of the retaining wall that we are going to build by that window wall. So we decided on this location because we're not going to have to dig the hole. We have to do a lot of earthwork, but with a shovel, and build that retaining wall and fill, but we don't have to do a lot of digging.
We started by preparing our freezer. As you can see here, you can see the compressor from the freezer. This has refrigerant in it that by law should not be expelled into the atmosphere. So if you've got a friend that can take that refrigerant out, that is ideal. I looked online and there were places where they said, it's not a big deal, just cut the line and let it vent. But, I don't really feel good about that. I think we should try and be responsible. So if you can do that, or if you feel like you can drill your vent holes without cutting those lines, then you could just go ahead and do that and leave it intact. Here you can see we set the freezer in. We did have to move just a little bit of earth, and you can see our...
Okay, it was a lot of earth because I was busy moving it.
Okay,
a lot of earth.
So...
See that retaining wall, how it's been built up? Yeah, that was a lot of earth.
It did require some work, but as Kylene mentioned, we didn't have to actually dig a hole, but we did have to do some earthwork to get it there. But really not too bad, especially when you've got kids.
It wasn't.
You can see the ground level there, and you can see where we're headed with this. You can see the gooseneck vents that we put in. One of those, as you can see on the far end there, is up high. The one on the near end is down low, so that we can get some cross movement of the warmer air moving up and out and the cooler air coming in on bottom to replace that. And this has just worked extremely well.
And tell them about the purpose of the gooseneck.
You can see the gooseneck vents allow the airflow, but they don't allow water to enter in. So that's the only purpose for those gooseneck vents, and they work really well. Here's just another detail. You can see the T where the vent goes in. This is on the upper vent, and then I just created some little blocks Just used a hole saw to create a block that would fit around that pipe, and then we used plumber's tape to secure it in place. Really fairly simple and fairly inexpensive. And then we put hardware cloth over. This is number 4 mesh. You could use number 14 mesh, which would be a tighter mesh, which wouldn't let the insects in. We have had just a little problem with insects, but really not much. So this number 4 mesh works well. We just didn't want mice or other things to be able to get in. And here in the bottom you can see we put the layer of sand. There's probably 2 or 3 inches of sand.
And that's really important. Don't skip the sand part. It's really important to control that humidity level, and the sand does a fantastic job.
And then you can see the pallet that we created simply out of fir strips. Fairly inexpensive and very easy to make. Really a good solution to allow for that airflow and to keep the bags of potatoes and whatever from being right on the wet sand. And you can see here just a bag of potatoes in there. We can fit about 5 bags in there.
And the soil comes right about to the edge of the freezer. That's a really good place for that to be, that soil level.
Right, because that provides the insulation that you need. And then to finish it off, we just created a pallet. I use cedar fence panels for the top there, and then just some 2x6s and 2x4s that were scrap. It supports and insulates the root cellar and just provides another layer of protection. Also, it keeps the grandkids from jumping on the roof of the freezer.
Yep.
And denting it and breaking it.
And that is another thing you have to worry about always, is you want to make sure that children could not get locked in there. That's a very important thing, and this prevents that totally. There's no lock on that freezer, so they couldn't get locked in. But having this pallet on it makes it so that they're not going to be climbing in there at all, because it's much too heavy for them to lift off.
And here was the next step, is just putting some bales of straw on top and then a tarp over it. One year I forgot to get the tarp on there. I procrastinated getting the tarp on there. And then I paid for it for the rest of the winter, because we had a lot of rain that winter, and those bales of straw got saturated with wet, and then they froze and they were heavy. And
they were really heavy to get off. I could not get them off. I can get off the dry ones just fine, but these were heavy.
The tarp really makes it better. And this year, you'll see a picture towards the end. This year I didn't have to use the bungee straps because that turned out to be a pain. I just put a pallet on top to hold that tarp in place, and it's done a great job. In this picture, we haven't quite finished the earthwork there. We're still finishing that wall. And so as we finish that wall, then around that end and the back side will all have soil up to just the level of the door.
But the interesting thing is that it's functioning really well even without that.
Right.
Which is really surprising to me.
You can see this year we just have a pallet sitting on top of that tarp. It sheds the water just fine. The straw bales have stayed dry, and it's much easier just to throw that pallet off and pull the tarp off and the straw to get in. We encourage you to think about this. If you look around, you can likely find an old dead freezer that you could do this with. It just works extremely well, and it provides potatoes for our family and beets through the entire winter.
And you could store other things. You could store the pears and the apples and things like that. We have chosen to use this buried freezer root cellar for potatoes and for beets. But we also are planning on doing another one just a little bit more to the west of it in that same location, which I will have to dig down. You'll have to dig down, not me. You. Yeah, you.
I will hire somebody to come and dig that.
But we're planning on doing another one because this has worked so well. And in that one, we would probably do the apples and the pears.
Depending on your spring, these potatoes will last from February or March or clear into April. We had a nice cool spring one year. We were pulling potatoes out of there in April, mid-April or towards the end of April, and they were still just fine. Other years it might warm up faster, and you may want to get them out earlier. You can see here some really great resources. The first one there, Inexpensive Root Cellars. 13 literally cool ideas to chill with.
That one has some really amazing ideas that people have done for inexpensive root cellars, so you'll want to check that one out.
Definitely. And also the Provident Prepper, chilling in our DIY buried freezer root cellar. And that's the one that this video was based off of. But also look at our show notes for these links and other information. So, what do you think? All it cost was about $20 worth of parts and a little bit of labor. Well, maybe a lot of labor.
Back-breaking labor.
But it really wasn't too bad. and you took an old piece of junk, an old broken down freezer, and turned it into something really very useful.
It's a valuable asset now that could really come in handy every day of your life as well as when disaster strikes. And now for the question of the day. What experience do you have building inexpensive root cellars, and how did they work for you? What ideas do you have that you could share with our viewers?
Comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.